I want some service.
Mr. Durante says, Miss Velez, that if you came to this party, you weren't to have anything to drink.
I don't care whatever you say. I want service.
Hollywood legends are often remembered as much for their colorful personal lives as for their iconic work on screen. But what about the stars who paved the way in Hollywood's formative years, the silent era? Many of these forgotten legends led lives of scandal, love, and loss that are as compelling as any story from the golden age of Hollywood. In this video, we take a look at 10 of these silent film stars, remarkable individuals who were once adored by the world, but have since been forgotten. These pioneers of the silver screen set the stage for what was to come, and their stories are a fascinating glimpse into the past. Number 10. Theda Bara. Theda Bara, born Theodosia Goodman, adopted a stage name that was an anagram of Arabic death. Growing up in Cincinnati, she developed a taste for the occult. Today, she might be considered a goth. This led her to become Hollywood's first vamp icon, a femme fatale who sucked the life out of her hapless male lovers. In her heyday, Bara was undoubtedly one of the biggest stars in the cinema. She was even voted the most expressive actress by a Deaf-Mute Institute in New York. Bara is best remembered for her often misquoted line, "Kiss me, my fool, ahow." Unfortunately for Bara, the vamp persona, stretched thin across dozens of roles, soon became a gimmick. To satisfy the public's fascination with their starlet, the studio planted wild stories in the press about her background, her ethnicity, even where she was born, rumored to be in the shadow of the Sphinx in Egypt. She was forced to wear a veil in public, and interviews were conducted in a dark, incense-filled room. Frustrated at being typecast, Bara tried her hand at theater, but the result was a disaster, with the press tearing her apart. Bara struggled to make the transition to sound. Later in life, she became known for her lavish dinner parties. Most of Bara's films are lost, including her most successful work, Cleopatra. However, a few seconds of Bara in this role have survived. The footage is haunting, showing the star in full vamp mode, gyrating before the camera in a costume that might be considered risque even by today's standards. Number 9. Lupe Velez. Lupe Velez was one of the first Latina actresses to gain a high profile in Hollywood, often cast in roles that played up her fiery Mexican Spitfire image. Her background, rumored to include a father who was a Mexican army general and a mother who was an opera singer, was probably a studio fabrication. But none of that mattered. Lupe Velez didn't need an interesting background to become one of the most vivacious and compelling personalities of her time. Today, we're often wary of the fiery Latina stereotype, but there's no denying Velez's passion. She loved to love, and she loved to fight. Some of her romantic conquests were among the biggest male stars of the day. Errol Flynn famously described how she would pray to the Catholic icons in her bedroom before making love. Velez's biographer counters that Flynn's storytelling and embellishments were legendary. Gary Cooper was said to have come close to proposing to her, but broke off the relationship at the insistence of his disapproving mother. Furious, Velez fired at Cooper as he boarded a train. It's unclear whether she meant to hit him. Velez married Johnny Weissmuller, the original Tarzan, who left his first wife for her. The makeup crew had to cover up scratches and love bites on his torso during filming. Velez was one of the few big names to make the transition to sound, but she met a tragic end. After divorcing Weissmuller, she had a relationship with actor Harold Raymond and was heartbroken when he refused to marry her after she became pregnant. In 1944, age 36, Velez took her own life. Number 8. Art Acord. Art, short for Artemis. Acord was one of Hollywood's original cowboy icons, starring in over 100 westerns during the silent era. Born in 1890 in either Oklahoma or Utah, Acord lived during the waning days of the Old West. Before becoming a film star, he was a stage performer and champion steer wrestler, even working with Buffalo Bill Cody. Although a gentleman when sober, Acord had a notoriously pugnacious streak when he drank. Along with his good friend Hoot Gibson, another screen cowboy, the two would often come to blows for no reason, only to reconcile when the booze wore off. When the U.S. entered World War I, Acord went overseas to fight and was awarded the prestigious Croix de Guerre for bravery. Despite his rugged physique, Acord's high-pitched voice made him unsuitable for the talkies. After 3 marriages, he left Hollywood in the late 1920s to take his cowboy act on the road in Mexico. When he ran out of money, he worked as a miner. A longtime alcoholic and depression sufferer, Acord tragically poisoned himself with arsenic in 1931 at the age of 40. Number 7. Helen Costello. Helen Costello was an early example of a familiar Hollywood trope: the celebrity child who just couldn't make it. As children, Costello and her sister Dolores occasionally appeared in films starring their father, Maurice Costello. As adults, both sisters managed to become silent film stars in their own right, although Helen couldn't make the transition to sound. Despite her great beauty, her voice was not considered suitable for the new sound era. By the age of 40, Costello had been married and divorced 4 times. During the trial for her second divorce, a newspaper reported that Costello's husband accused her of alcoholism and produced a dozen expensively bound, snappy books to discredit her literary tastes. Her 4th marriage ended in a well-publicized custody battle, which she was forced to abandon due to financial difficulties. The years of hardship seem to have exacerbated Costello's personal problems. At the age of 50, she entered a psychiatric hospital for addiction treatment and died 2 days later, apparently of pneumonia. It was reported that less than a dozen people attended her funeral. As Maurice Costello is Drew Barrymore's great-grandfather, Helen is Drew's grand-aunt. Fortunately, unlike her famous relative, the once troubled Drew managed to pull herself together. Number 6. John Gilbert. John Gilbert may not have been the biggest matinee idol of the silent era, but he came incredibly close. Female audiences in particular couldn't get enough of the smoldering hunk known as the Great Lover. So imagine the mass disappointment when Gilbert was snatched up by the great screen goddess herself, Greta Garbo. Gilbert and Garbo were the reigning celebrity couple of their day, so passionately in love that, as co-stars, they often continued with their love scenes even after the director shouted "cut," much to the embarrassment of the cast and crew. Some cite studio politics as the reason for Gilbert's rapid decline in popularity during the talkies, though others insist that audiences simply hated his voice. While Garbo's Swedish accent and throaty contralto only added to her mystique, Gilbert's voice was considered too high-pitched, too prim. Worse still, Garbo became increasingly distant in their relationship, and legend has it that their romance ended when Garbo failed to show up for their planned wedding. Some, however, insist that the story of Garbo leaving Gilbert at the altar is a fabrication. The truth may never be known, especially as Gilbert, who struggled with alcoholism, died of a heart attack in 1936, and Garbo retired from public life in the early 40s, never giving a single interview. Number 5. Florence Lawrence. The name Florence Lawrence may be little known today, but historians know her as the first movie star. In the early days of cinema, screen talent went unbilled, as producers feared that an actor's name on the marquee would lead to fame and demands for higher salaries. Celebrity proved an unstoppable force, however, and audiences inevitably gravitated towards their favorites. Foremost among them was Lawrence, the pretty Canadian-American girl with the dimpled chin who was simply celebrated as the Biograph Girl, after the studio that released her films. In 1908, Lawrence and her husband, fellow actor Harry Salter, left Biograph and signed with Independent Moving Pictures. For the first time, her name was revealed, and she became the first screen star to benefit from a publicity campaign. To boost her fame, her new studio boss planted a story in the press that the Biograph Girl had died in a car crash, only to run an advertisement weeks later showing pictures of the popular star alive and well. The public were delighted to have their grief put to rest, and it was reported that overjoyed fans tore off Lawrence's clothes in the street. But that, too, was a manufactured story. Behind the scenes, Lawrence's life was not entirely happy. In 1914, she was injured in a fire on the set, and the resulting scars severely hampered her career. Salter died in 1920, and a second marriage to a wealthy cosmetics salesman ended after 10 years, when he told her she wasn't as pretty as she used to be. Her third and final marriage, to a man who abused her, lasted only 5 months. Lawrence attempted a comeback, but by the 1930s she had been reduced to playing uncredited bit parts in talkies. The first film star had become the first has-been. On the 28th of December, 1938, between the ages of 48 and 52, Lawrence, beset by an incurable illness, took her own life by ingesting arsenic-based ant paste. Number 4. Maurice Costello. If Florence Lawrence was the first movie star, Maurice Costello was the first movie heartthrob. Employed for a time by Thomas Edison's film studio, Costello, whose roots were Irish despite his Italian-sounding surname, is said to have been the first star to receive fan mail. The public wrote to him simply as Dimples, captivated by his boyish charm. Costello was also one of the first prima donnas in film. Unlike many of his contemporaries who were happy to take on multiple roles, he refused to help build and paint sets, perhaps because of his previous success in the theater. This pride may explain why pendants were eventually introduced to the sets. Later in life, Costello fell on hard times. In 1939, with his film career long gone, he sued his daughters Helene and Dolores for financial support. Unfortunately, Helene also had her own well-publicized problems, leaving Maurice with little support. As a final note, Dolores was the wife of John Barrymore, which makes Maurice Costello the great-grandfather of Drew Barrymore, sharing the same birthday on the 22nd of February. Number 3. William Haines. In the 1920s, William Haines, known to his friends as Billy, was one of MGM's most bankable leading men. Understandably, studio head Louis B. Mayer was more than a little concerned when Haines was arrested one night at a YMCA, accused of lewd acts with a sailor he'd picked up earlier in the day. The studio managed to keep the incident from going public, but for Mayer, it was the last straw. Mayer had previously urged Haines to quash rumors of his homosexuality by entering into a sham marriage with a woman. In the days before gay rights, these were known as lavender marriages. Haines refused because he was not only openly gay, but also in a committed relationship with a man called James Shields. After the YMCA incident, Haines's contract was summarily terminated. Together with Shields, Haines quietly rebuilt his life as a successful interior designer. The William Haines Design Company still exists today. Unfortunately, homophobia disrupted their lives again in 1936 when a neighbor falsely accused Shields of molesting his young son. Haines and Shields were confronted by a local mob outside their home in Manhattan Beach, California. The area was a hotbed of racist activity at the time, and it's likely that the mob was a white supremacist group. In any case, Haines and Shields were savagely beaten on their doorstep. The charge of child abuse against Shields was highly dubious, but sadly the couple never saw justice as the men who attacked them were never charged. Shortly after Haines's death from cancer in 1973, Shields took his own life, leaving a note citing a broken heart. Number 2. Sessue Hayakawa. Sessue Hayakawa was the first Asian actor to become a matinee idol. At one point, he was reportedly the highest-paid actor in the cinema, able to compete with the likes of Charlie Chaplin and William S. Hart. The son of an aristocratic family in Chiba, Japan, Hayakawa was groomed for a naval career until a schoolmate's dare caused him to rupture his eardrum, disqualifying him from service. Ashamed of disappointing his family, especially his father, a provincial governor, Hayakawa attempted harakiri. He was saved by his faithful dog, who alerted the servants to the commotion. Having mended fences with his family, Hayakawa enrolled at the University of Chicago in 1912 to study political economy. Despite facing racism and weighing only 60 kilograms, he managed to secure a place on the school's football team. Using judo to take down larger opponents, something unfamiliar to most Westerners at the time, Hayakawa's reputation grew as people believed he possessed occult power. He eventually made his way to Los Angeles, where he became involved with a playhouse in the Little Tokyo district. One of their productions, The Typhoon, impressed a local producer and was made into a film with the original cast, which was a success and cemented Hayakawa's movie star status. He drove a gold-plated Pierre Aero and was known for throwing lavish parties at his 32-room LA mansion. The advent of sound film was detrimental to Hayakawa's career. After spending much of the 30s and 40s in France, he made a comeback in 1949 with Tokyo Joe, opposite Humphrey Bogart. Some 3 decades after his initial heyday, his performance in The Bridge on the River Kwai, 1957, earned him an Oscar nomination. Number 1. Annette Kellerman. As a child, Annette Kellerman turned to swimming to combat a degenerative muscle disease. By the time the condition subsided, Kellerman had become an exceptionally skilled swimmer and diver in her native Australia. As an actress, she became famous for her aquatic adventure films and is remembered as the first movie star to appear nude on camera. Known in Australia as the Diving Venus, Kellerman came to the world's attention when she became the first woman to swim across the English Channel, a feat she never achieved despite 3 attempts. In 1907, she was famously arrested on a Boston beach for wearing a one-piece bathing suit, a bold and form-fitting garment that challenged the cumbersome, floppy swimwear of the time. The arrest brought Kellerman considerable publicity and made Annette Kellerman's swimsuits a popular and socially acceptable trend. She began selling the suits herself, contributing to their rise in popularity. Kellerman's most notable film, A Daughter of the Gods, 1916, featured her in a nude scene, a daring move for the time, as this was before the introduction of the Hays Code, a set of censorship guidelines that forbade cinematic depictions of nudity, drug use, miscegenation, and white slavery. Like many silent film stars, Kellerman struggled to make the transition to sound film, or talkies. After leaving Hollywood, she opened a health food store in Long Beach, California, and became a respected author, lecturer, and advocate for health and fitness. Her children's book, Fairy Tales of the South Seas, was one of her many successful publications. A vibrant personality to the end, she died in 1975 at the age of 89. We hope you enjoyed this trip down memory lane, exploring the lives of these 10 captivating silent film stars who once ruled the silver screen. If you're a fan of Hollywood history and the stories behind the stars, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more content like this. Let us know in the comments which silent film star you found most fascinating, and share any stories you know about them. Thanks for watching,